She was just covering one shift for her sick uncle. But when a billionaire collapsed in her back seat, her entire life changed forever. The Nebraska morning was heavy with fog, the kind that seemed to wrap itself around every window pane and lamppost like an old memory refusing to let go. 18-year-old Harlow Jane Duckett stood by the kitchen counter in her uncle's modest two-bedroom home, carefully measuring out his medications one by one. She didn't need to read the labels anymore. Her hands already moved from bottle to bottle with the practiced rhythm of someone who had done this far too often for someone her age. Uncle Crawford had once been a strong man, a truck driver for over 3 decades, his laugh deep and full, his stories even deeper. He had taken Harlow in when she was 10, after a car accident claimed both her parents in one tragic instant. They had been returning from her school recital. She remembered the dress she wore that day, pale blue with little daisies. Crawford never let her feel the weight of being an orphan. He cooked, cleaned, told jokes at bedtime, and drove her to every school event he could. But years of driving, arthritis, and untreated back injuries had slowly worn him down. These days, even standing upright was a task that took time and pain. That morning, as Harlow gently woke him up with a glass of lukewarm water and his daily pills, he groaned louder than usual. His fingers were swollen, and his knees refused to support him. He tried to wave her off, grumbling, "Just a bad night's sleep, baby girl." But when he reached for the bathroom counter and missed it, collapsing onto the floor with a thud that shook the tiles, Harlow panicked. She called 911. The EMTs were kind but honest. Crawford needed rest. No more work, no more long hours behind the wheel. His blood pressure was through the roof, and his joints were inflamed beyond manageable levels. One of them, a young woman with weary eyes, placed a gentle hand on Harlow's shoulder and said, "He shouldn't be working at all. If you can, keep him home, please." But how could they afford that? His job, driving for a local private ride service called Eagle Run Transport, was their only income. Without it, there would be no meds, no food, no power next month. Harlow had put college on hold already. She worked part-time at a diner and took tutoring gigs when she could, but none of it was enough. That night, after Crawford fell asleep on the living room recliner with a heating pad over his knees, Harlow quietly took his driver's ID badge out of the drawer. She stared at it for a long time. His name, his photo, his employee number. The app on his old phone still worked. All she had to do was turn it on and accept a shift. It wasn't legal. She knew that. But it was either that or risk watching him waste away in silence, because they couldn't afford a doctor. She braided her hair tightly under a baseball cap, borrowed Crawford's jacket, and kept the lights dim when picking up passengers. Most rode in the back and didn't look twice. Her voice was low and polite. She used GPS for every route, never spoke unless spoken to, and made sure the car was spotless. For 3 weeks, she did this. Night shifts only, enough to fly under the radar. She'd come home before dawn, wash up, make breakfast for Crawford, then sleep in short bursts before her other jobs. But something had to give eventually. One Thursday night, around 10:30 p.m., the app lit up again. Eagle Ride Request. Pickup, 485 Fairwind Plaza. Client, Mr. S. Calloway. The ride was marked urgent. Executive class. Tip guaranteed. Harlow blinked. That was in the business district, not the usual airport or residential pickups. She hesitated only for a second, then accepted the ride. She didn't know then that this particular call would change everything. She didn't know that Mr. S. Calloway wasn't just any passenger. He was the man who hadn't been seen in public for months, a billionaire CEO whose name once filled headlines, and whose heart would stop in the backseat of her uncle's car. The rain had started falling lightly by the time Harlow pulled into the glossy entrance of 485 Fairwind Plaza. Towering glass walls reflected the streaks of silver from passing cars, and the automatic lobby lights buzzed in the drizzle, like they were waiting for something to happen. It was the kind of place Harlow never expected to visit, let alone work a pickup from. Men in long wool coats passed under the awnings, with briefcases and Bluetooth earpieces, their steps brisk, their eyes never meeting hers. She took a deep breath and double-checked the app. The timer had started, the client had been notified she had arrived. The note in the system read, "Client prefers discretion. No small talk. Black car preferred." Thankfully, her uncle's sedan, though old, had tinted windows, and a fresh detailing she did herself 2 nights ago. She sat still, hands at 10 and 2 on the wheel, every nerve on edge. This wasn't like the usual bar runs or airport drop-offs. This had weight. The kind of weight that comes with money or power or both. At precisely 10:38 p.m., the revolving glass doors parted, and out stepped a tall man in a tailored navy coat. No assistant, no umbrella, no entourage. Just him. He moved with tired precision as though every step cost him something. And yet he still held himself with the kind of authority you can't fake, the kind that comes from being in command too long to know any other way. He glanced briefly at her car, then opened the rear passenger door and slid in. Water from his coat pooled on the leather seat. She flicked on the wipers and adjusted the rearview mirror, careful not to be obvious, and caught her first glimpse of him. The man looked to be in his late 30s or early 40s. His jaw was square, lips tight, and eyes sharp but shadowed, like someone who hadn't slept in years, or maybe someone who dreamt of things he couldn't forget. A 5 o'clock shadow ran along his jawline like it had been intentionally left there, and his hair, thick and dark, was streaked at the temples with premature silver. He didn't speak, just gave a nod, barely a movement, and leaned his head back against the seat. Harlow tapped the address provided into the GPS and pulled away from the curb, merging silently into the near-empty city lanes. The only sound inside the car was the faint rhythm of rain and the occasional turn signal. Her hands tightened around the steering wheel. Something about him felt off. Not dangerous, not angry, just hollow, like a man made of smoke and iron. About 10 minutes into the ride, they hit a stretch of road lined with tall trees on one side and a black metal fence that seemed to go on forever. The street was quiet, save for their car and the occasional glow of a street lamp. Then something shifted. She noticed it in the mirror. The man's hand moved to his chest. At first, it looked like he was just adjusting his coat, but then his expression twisted, his mouth tightening, and he leaned forward slightly with a low, involuntary grunt. Harlow's pulse spiked. "Sir?" she said carefully. "Are you?" He didn't answer. His hand gripped at the center of his chest now, his breathing ragged, shallow. His head leaned against the window, then dropped forward in a slow, unnatural motion. "Sir?" she repeated louder, panic creeping into her voice. She pulled the car to the shoulder, hazard lights flashing. In one movement, she threw it in park, jumped out, and opened the back passenger door. His skin was pale. Not sickly pale, but waxy, wrong. His eyes were fluttering. One hand was still pressed to his chest, the other limp at his side. Harlow's training from high school first aid kicked in like muscle memory. She lowered the seat, took his pulse. Weak, irregular. She reached into the glove compartment for the emergency kit and called 911 with shaking hands. "This is Eagle Run driver ID 7432, she said quickly. "My client is unresponsive. He's mid-40s, chest pain, shallow breath. We're on Route 6, just past Hawthorne Lane, westbound shoulder. Please, send an ambulance now." She turned back to him. He was barely conscious. His lips were forming words, but no sound came. "You're going to be okay," she said, even though her throat was tight. "Just hold on. Help's coming. Don't fall asleep, okay? Talk to me if you can. Please." But his eyes rolled back slightly and his chest heaved once, like a wave crashing inward. Minutes stretched into hours. She kept talking even as the sirens finally howled in the distance, then grew louder, closer, real. Red and white lights cut through the rain like a sword. Paramedics rushed in, one of them instantly recognizing the man. "Holy hell, that's S..." He stopped himself. "Get the defib. He's crashing." They worked quickly, efficiently, as Harlow stood soaked and shaking beside the open car door, her cap nearly falling off. She watched as the man, the passenger, was placed onto a stretcher and hooked up to oxygen. Just before the ambulance doors shut, a medic turned and looked at her. "You saved his life. You did everything right." But Harlow wasn't thinking about that. She was thinking about the name the EMT almost said. She knew it. She had seen it before, on magazines and grocery lines, whispered in news stories about tech deals and old scandals. S. Calloway. That wasn't just some rich businessman. That was Silas Calloway, the reclusive CEO of Calloway Ventures, a billionaire who hadn't been seen in public since his wife's mysterious death over a year ago. And he'd just collapsed in the backseat of her uncle's car. The morning after the incident felt surreal, as if Harlow had dreamed the entire night into existence. But the ache in her legs, the dry sting in her throat, and the unread messages piling up on her uncle's phone all reminded her that everything, the panic, the rain, The billionaire nearly dying in her back seat had been very, very real. She barely slept. After the ambulance pulled away with Silas Calloway inside, Harlow had driven home in silence, her mind spiraling through guilt, fear, and 1,000 what-ifs. What if he didn't survive? What if the transport company found out she wasn't Crawford Duckett, the registered driver? What if someone saw her, reported her, and everything came crashing down? Crawford was still asleep in the recliner when she walked in, his breathing steady, the TV muttering low reruns. She didn't wake him. She just sat on the floor beside him and cried quietly into her hands. By noon the next day, the call came. It wasn't from the company, it wasn't from the police. It was a private number, and something deep inside her knew exactly who it was. She hesitated, then answered. "Hello? Is this Mr. Duckett's number?" A calm female voice asked. Harlow's stomach clenched. "Yes," she said carefully, her voice tight. "He's unavailable." The woman didn't respond immediately. There was a pause, then, "This is Delphina Hayes, executive assistant to Mr. Silas Calloway. He's asked to meet the driver from last night, in person." Harlow went cold. Her mouth opened, but nothing came out for several seconds. She cleared her throat. "Is he okay?" "He's stable," Delphina said, her tone softening just slightly. "And conscious. He specifically asked to speak to the one who drove him. He remembers the car, the voice. He asked if the driver's name was really Crawford." Harlow felt like the floor beneath her shifted slightly. "I can meet him," she said after a long beat, "but it's complicated." Another pause. "I understand," Delphina replied. "He's expecting you at 2:30. Cornerstone Medical Center, top floor. Ask for his suite at the executive wing." And then the line went dead. Harlow sat frozen for a few minutes, staring at the wall. The panic was back, thick and crawling. She didn't know if this was a thank you, an ambush, or the beginning of the end. But something inside her told her she couldn't hide from this. At 2:00, she stood outside the mirror-lined entrance of Cornerstone Medical Center, wearing the best things she had. Black jeans, a clean button-down shirt, and her hair in a tight braid. She looked younger than 18, and she knew it. Her hands were shaking when she gave her name at the front desk. The nurse nodded and motioned to the private elevator, which was guarded by a man in a gray suit and an earpiece. When the doors slid open, Delphina Hayes was already waiting, tall, impeccably dressed in slate gray silk and pointed heels. She looked every bit like the right hand of a billionaire. Her eyes scanned Harlow quickly, not unkindly, but sharply. "You're the girl," Delphina said simply. Harlow nodded, unsure what to say. Delphina pressed the elevator button. "He's expecting you." The suite was nothing like a hospital room, more like a high-end hotel lounge that just happened to have a heart monitor near the bed. The lights were dimmed, the curtains half drawn, and there he was, Silas Calloway, sitting up, IV still in his arm, dressed in a fresh black shirt and looking at her like he'd been waiting a decade instead of 12 hours. His face was pale, but no longer ghostly. There was color in his cheeks again. His eyes were unreadable, calm but assessing. A hawk, sizing up a storm. "You're not Crawford Duckett," he said, his voice low, quiet. Harlow's heart stopped. She stepped into the room slowly, her throat dry. "No, sir, I'm his niece. Harlow." Silas leaned back slightly. "How old are you?" 18. He nodded slowly, as if confirming something to himself. "And why," he continued, voice measured, "was an 18-year-old girl driving her uncle's car under his name at 10:30 last night?" Harlow felt the tears threatening, but she held them back. Her voice shook only slightly as she answered, "Because he can't work anymore. He's sick. His joints are failing. And we couldn't afford for him to take a day off. We couldn't even afford his meds unless I worked too." She paused, searching his face. "I didn't mean to deceive anyone. I didn't want him to suffer for doing everything he could for me." Silas stared at her in silence. "You saved my life," he said finally. Harlow blinked. "You acted faster than most trained professionals. You pulled over, checked my vitals, kept me awake, called the paramedics, gave them the exact location. You stabilized me. I know this because the doctors told me I would have died in that car if I'd been 5 minutes further from a hospital." He leaned forward slightly. "Do you know how rare it is," he said, his voice darker now, "to find someone who breaks the rules for the right reasons?" Harlow said nothing. Silas studied her again, then reached over to the side table and pressed a button. Delphina entered silently. "Offer her a position," he said. Delphina blinked. "Sir?" "She doesn't belong behind the wheel. She belongs in the building. Train her. On-site assistant. Temporary contract. See if she's what I think she is." Harlow's mouth fell open. "What? Wait, no, I don't have a degree or experience or—" "You have instincts," Silas interrupted. "And that's rarer than any resume." He leaned back against the pillows again, his eyes fluttering slightly. "Get her started Monday, and for God's sake, someone get her a proper badge." Delphina gave the faintest smirk and turned to Harlow. "Welcome to Callaway Ventures." And just like that, in a sterile hospital room, with rain still drying on her jacket, Harlow Duckett's entire life shifted. Not because she'd tried to lie, but because she'd dared to care. The Callaway Ventures building was unlike anything Harlow had ever seen up close. It wasn't just tall, it loomed. 54 floors of steel, tinted glass, and quiet power, rooted in the very heart of downtown Omaha. The lobby alone was bigger than the entire diner where Harlow used to work double shifts. Everything smelled faintly of leather and ozone. Each surface gleamed with intention. No clutter, no noise, no wasted space. On her first official day, she stood in the elevator wearing a simple navy dress Delphina had helped her pick out, her hair pulled into a sleek bun. Her hands clutched a borrowed leather satchel she had no idea how to properly carry. Every nerve in her body pulsed with fear. She didn't belong here, and she knew it. The elevator chimed at the 51st floor. The executive suite. The doors opened to a hush of beige carpet, minimalist art, and tall glass walls that stretched across a panoramic view of the skyline. Delphina was waiting, already typing something on a tablet with her usual composed efficiency. "Try not to look like you're being hunted," Delphina said without looking up. "Straight spine, calm breath, quiet shoes. Come." Harlow stepped out and followed her, clutching the strap of her satchel like it was a life vest. Delphina led her through a maze of hallways into a wide corner office. Not Silas's, but a connected assistant's workspace, with a view nearly as stunning. There was a sleek black desk, a glass console table with bottled water, and a dual monitor setup already glowing with her credentials. "Sit, we'll start light," Delphina said, glancing at her watch. "Calendar syncing, vendor orders, basic correspondence. You'll shadow me until I say otherwise." "Shadow you?" Harlow asked, her voice tight. "Silas prefers direct lines of trust," Delphina replied. "If you're going to assist him personally, you'll need to understand how this place moves, who speaks, and more importantly, who listens." It took Harlow all morning just to understand the corporate structure. The Callaway Empire wasn't just one company. It was dozens. Real estate, biotech, software, logistics. Each division had its own CEOs, boards, and politics. Silas didn't just oversee them. He owned the floor they stood on. And yet, despite the vastness of his influence, Harlow noticed something strange. People barely saw him. His presence was felt in signatures, in directives that came down like whispers from the 54th floor. But very few people interacted with the man himself. Around 2 p.m., Delphina walked her to the top floor. "Wait here," she said outside the heavy black door. "If he's distracted, don't take it personally. If he's cold, don't speak unless spoken to. And if he's quiet, stay longer." Before Harlow could ask what that last part meant, Delphina disappeared down the hall. The door opened a moment later. Silas was standing by the window, phone pressed to his ear. He gave her a short nod without turning fully and pointed to the chair in front of his desk. She sat down carefully, knees together, trying not to fidget. He finished his call, placed the phone on the desk, and finally looked at her. His expression was unreadable. "I meant what I said," he began. "Instinct matters more than training. But instinct without humility becomes recklessness. Do you understand?" Harlow nodded quickly. "Yes, sir." "You're not here because of charity," he added. "You're here because I saw something in you I can use." The word use rang in her head longer than it should have. "I want honesty. When I ask you something, I want the truth, even if it's not the answer I expect. If you make a mistake, own it. I don't tolerate dishonesty." Harlow nodded again. "Understood." Silas sat down, his eyes briefly scanning the tablet on his desk. You saved my life, Harlow. But that doesn't make you special. Not yet." She felt her throat tighten, but said nothing. Then, unexpectedly, he looked up and asked, Why didn't you just call the company and tell them your uncle was sick? Why not be honest from the start? Harlow hesitated. Because I didn't think anyone would listen, she admitted. Not without consequences. I was trying to protect him. Silas considered that. And who's protecting you? The question caught her off guard. I don't know, she said honestly. Maybe no one. He didn't react, just pressed a button on his desk intercom. Delphina, send up the press folders for the Tokyo delegation. And bring her a badge. Yes, sir, came the crisp reply. Silas looked back at her. You'll assist me this week on the Japan merger calls. You'll observe and take notes. Then we'll test your instincts. After that, well, we'll see. Harlow nodded again, heart thudding. As she stood to leave, he spoke once more, quieter this time. My wife used to say good intentions are only half the battle. The rest is endurance. She froze. I'm sorry about her, she said softly. He didn't respond. She stepped out of the office and back into the hallway, the door clicking shut behind her. Delphina stood there holding an ID badge. It read, Harlow Duckett, Executive Assistant, Temporary Clearance. She clipped it to her dress, her hands shaking. As she followed Delphina back to her desk, she realized something. This wasn't just a job. It was a test, a labyrinth. And deep inside her, beneath the fear, the doubt, and the borrowed confidence, Harlow knew one thing with absolute clarity. She wasn't going to fail. The week that followed moved like a storm front, fast, relentless, and full of unseen undercurrents. Harlow barely had time to process what she was learning before the next wave hit. Silas was a machine when it came to business. His workdays started before dawn and often extended late into the night. His schedule packed with meetings, strategy calls, legal reviews, and silence so heavy it spoke louder than words. And she was there for all of it. By the third day, Harlow was waking up before her alarm, pulling on pressed slacks and blouses Delphina had helped her acquire, reviewing the merger reports she barely understood, and sitting beside Silas's office in near complete silence. He didn't talk much, but he watched everything, including her. She took meticulous notes, listened, memorized who spoke, who hesitated, who lied with polished words and fake smiles. She began to understand not only the structure of Callaway Ventures, but also its soul, the way decisions rippled across continents, affecting lives she would never meet. It was terrifying and thrilling. But the closer she got to the center of the empire, the more she noticed something odd about Silas. He wasn't just precise. He was haunted. It showed in the way he stared at the window when no one was speaking. It showed in the way he avoided long conversations, especially with women. And most of all, it showed in the way he kept his late wife's photo tucked into the inside drawer of his desk, hidden but reachable. A picture of a woman with auburn curls and laughing eyes, forever frozen in time. Harlow hadn't asked. She didn't dare. Until one evening, after a 14-hour day that left her spinning with fatigue, she lingered in his office longer than usual. The Tokyo deal had just closed, a massive victory, and the executive team had left hours ago. The city lights glowed behind them, casting reflections on the polished floor like golden ghosts. Silas was seated at his desk, blazer draped over his chair, sleeves rolled up to his elbows. He looked less like a CEO and more like a man who'd stayed too long at the edge of a battlefield. Harlow cleared her throat. Do you want me to shut everything down before I go? He didn't look at her, just nodded absently. Leave the ledger file open. I'm not done. She moved to log out of the secondary system. Her fingers hesitated above the keyboard. Then, before she could stop herself, she said, You don't sleep much, do you? Silas looked up, his expression unreadable, but not angry, just tired. No, not anymore. A beat passed. She considered stepping away, but something inside her rebelled against silence. I know what it's like, she said quietly, to lose someone and have it echo through everything. His eyes narrowed, but not harshly. Curious, she continued, her voice low. My parents died when I was 10. I still remember the exact sound of the phone ringing, the officer's voice, the way my uncle stood frozen in the doorway. She looked away, embarrassed by the emotion rising too fast. Silas didn't interrupt. He waited. And that alone made her keep speaking. For a long time, I thought grief was something you survive once, like a storm that eventually passes, but it's not. It's something you carry, like an invisible scar. The room was so quiet she could hear the hum of the city far below. Silas leaned back slowly, studying her. My wife, he said finally. Savannah. She died in a fire, out at the lake house. I wasn't there. The words sat between them like broken glass. They said it was faulty wiring, that she was alone, that it was quick. His voice was devoid of emotion, hollow. But I still see her face when I close my eyes, and sometimes I wonder if I had been there, maybe. He cut himself off. You ever wish you could go back and change just one moment? He asked, his voice brittle. Harlow swallowed. Every day. Something shifted in the room then. An invisible thread pulled taut between two broken hearts. Silas looked down at the photo on his desk, his fingers brushing over it once before gently closing the drawer. I don't usually talk about her, he said quietly. Why now? She asked. He paused. Because you don't look at me like the rest of them do? Like I'm something dangerous or broken beyond repair. I don't think you're broken, she said softly. I think you're just holding on to something too heavy for one person. Their eyes met. It was not romantic, not yet, but it was intimate in a way neither of them had felt in years. Two strangers in a glass tower, surrounded by power and silence, yet suddenly seen fully without armor. Silas stood. You should go. It's late. She nodded, backing away, reaching for her things. As she stepped into the hallway, he said one last thing. Harlow? She turned. Next time, he said. Don't wait for permission to speak the truth. Just say it. She nodded slowly, heart pounding. That night, as she rode the elevator down alone, she realized something had changed. Not in her job, not even in how Silas saw her, but in how she saw herself. She wasn't a girl covering for her uncle anymore. She was stepping into something real, something dangerous. And for the first time, she wasn't afraid. The storm didn't announce itself with thunder or rain. It came in the form of a name on an email header. Subject: Urgent. Vance Inquiry. Employee Credentials. Request for verification. From LegalVanceHoldings.com. It hit Harlow like a punch to the gut. She was seated at her desk, reviewing upcoming itinerary notes for Silas's quarterly board retreat, when the flagged email popped into her inbox. Her heart instantly sank. Vance. The name had only come up once in conversation with Delphina, spoken like a curse in a room of glass and steel. Aidan Vance was the CEO of Vance Holdings, a rival tech investment group that had tried for years to force Callaway Ventures into a hostile merger. A man with sharp suits, sharper ethics, and a taste for sabotage. Silas had thwarted him several times, but rumor had it, Vance didn't forget defeats. He collected them and waited. And now, he had her name. She clicked open the email and read through the request. Cold, clinical, polite on the surface. But the intent was clear. They were asking for verification of Crawford Duckett's employment status and associated identities used in recent Eagle Run activity. It was phrased like routine compliance, but it was a threat. Her hands trembled as she read the last line. Please advise if Ms. Harlow Duckett's current position has been vetted through appropriate channels. We are happy to provide evidence of false representation should you require. They knew, or at least suspected. She barely noticed Delphina approaching until her shadow fell over the desk. What is it? Delphina asked, her eyes sharp. She never missed a beat. Harlow turned the screen toward her. Vance. Delphina read the email in seconds. Her jaw tightened, but she didn't curse or panic. Instead, she pulled out her phone and texted something rapid fire. I'll alert Silas. No. Harlow stood suddenly. Wait, maybe I should just go. Delphina looked up. I'm serious, Harlow said. If he responds to this, if it goes public, it could destroy everything. He just recovered. He doesn't need more scandal. If I walk away now, he'd fire me, Delphina interrupted coldly, for letting you walk out without a fight. Harlow stared at her. You think I don't know who you are, Harlow? She continued. Then I watched you drag yourself in here with borrowed clothes and terrified eyes. You've built something real, and you matter to him more than he's willing to admit. You think leaving is noble? It's cowardice wrapped in guilt. Before Harlow could respond, her desk phone rang. Line 1. She picked it up slowly. Harlow, came Silas's voice, calm. heavy. My office. Now! She followed the sound of her own footsteps all the way to the top floor. The door was already open. He stood by the window, suit jacket off, sleeves rolled up. The photo of Savannah was gone from his desk. Sit, he said. She obeyed, her pulse crashing in her ears. I read the email. I didn't mean, don't explain yet, he interrupted. Let me ask you something. His tone was unreadable. Did you lie to get this job? She swallowed hard. Yes. Did you lie about your reasons? No. He nodded once. Do you regret it? Harlow hesitated. No, not even a little. Silas walked slowly to the edge of his desk and leaned against it, arms crossed. Vance has been trying to dig up dirt on me for years. He's leaked false contracts, bribed junior staff, and even tried to get a mole on our legal team. But this is smarter, because it's personal. He paused. He found the one person here who isn't protected. Harlow lowered her head, shame twisting her gut. You think I can't handle scandal? He asked. That I haven't bled for this company already? Let me make one thing very clear, Harlow. I will not lose sleep over people who judge you for trying to save your family, but I will lose sleep if you leave this place because you think you're poison. She looked up. His expression had changed. It wasn't stern anymore. It was pained. You told me once that grief leaves a scar, he said softly. Well, you've been one of the only things that made me stop picking at mine. Harlow's eyes welled with tears she hadn't prepared for. She blinked fast, refusing to let them fall. So, what do we do? She asked. Silas stood, his voice hardening again. We fight back. He walked to the wall, tapped a panel, and brought up a confidential file on a side screen. Vance's company has 3 active fraud investigations buried in legal arbitration. I've had a PI tailing one of his silent partners for months. If he wants to start a war, he just picked the wrong battlefield. But what about the email? I'll handle it publicly. But I need you to trust me privately. He turned to her again. I don't care what the world thinks of you. I care what you think when you look in the mirror. There was a long silence between them. And then something snapped quietly into place. She stood. I'm not going anywhere. Silas gave a single nod. Good. As she turned to leave, he added, Oh, and Harlow? She looked back. Next week, he said with a glint in his eyes, you're not just assisting the Tokyo call. You're leading the debrief. Her mouth fell open. What? No, I can't. You can, he said simply. You've earned it. The war wasn't over, but for the first time, Harlow knew she wasn't facing it alone. The day of the Tokyo debrief arrived with skies painted a soft gray and the kind of quiet tension that settles before something significant. Harlow stood in front of the tall bathroom mirror on the 51st floor, adjusting the collar of her cream blouse, trying to breathe through the rising wave of self-doubt. It had been a week since Silas had asked her to lead the debrief. A week that passed in a blur of preparation, strategy meetings, note revisions, and long nights reviewing legal summaries and financial statements she still only half understood. Delphina had become both drill sergeant and mentor, pushing Harlow past the walls of insecurity she hadn't even realized she'd built. You're not a girl sitting at the edge of the room anymore, Delphina had said just the night before, reviewing Harlow's notes for the 10th time. You're walking into that room as his voice. Act like it. But now, standing alone just minutes before the meeting, Harlow could feel every part of herself trembling. She hadn't come from this world. She hadn't trained for it, hadn't gone to Ivy League schools or interned on Wall Street. She'd been slinging hash browns at a diner just 4 months ago, and now she was supposed to present to executives who wore tailored suits and carried stock portfolios heavier than her entire life. She closed her eyes. Not for me, she whispered. For Crawford. For Silas. For everything I've survived. When she stepped into the conference room, the atmosphere shifted. A long obsidian table stretched the length of the room, lined with senior executives, analysts, and legal counsels. A large digital screen displayed the Callaway Ventures emblem alongside a minimalist header. Tokyo Strategic Review, Post-Merger Integration. At the head of the table sat Silas, calm, composed, his expression unreadable, but his eyes locked with hers the moment she entered. And in them, she saw something that steadied her far more than a pep talk. Trust. He believed she could do this. She took her place at the front of the room. The room quieted, the screen blinked. Her presentation lit up. Good morning, she began, her voice slightly too tight at first, but it found rhythm as she continued. I'll be walking us through a review of the Tokyo acquisition, key metrics, early returns, cultural integration points, and risk factors. Her fingers danced across the digital remote. Slide after slide displayed economic data, legal milestones, HR adjustments, and feedback from their newly absorbed Tokyo partner firm. As she spoke, something extraordinary happened. They listened. Not just politely, not condescendingly. They actually listened. The finance director, a stern woman named Coralie Truss, even leaned forward and asked a follow-up question mid-presentation, not to trip her up, but to better understand one of her projections. And Harlow answered with clarity, citing her source, showing a graph she had built the night before. By the time she reached the final slide summarizing next step strategies, her voice was steady, her shoulders relaxed, and her heart, though still pounding, was filled with something she hadn't felt since childhood: pride. When the room broke into light applause, Silas didn't clap, but he looked at her with a softness so rare it nearly undid her composure. After the room cleared, she gathered her things, pulse still racing, when Silas motioned her to stay. She approached his seat slowly. You didn't tell me about the new integration clause with Shimizu, he said, tapping one of the slides. I thought it would work better as a surprise, she replied, nervous. It wasn't in the initial draft, but I noticed the inconsistency in their last-minute terms. I added the clause to level the margin expectations. Silas was silent for a moment. You knew they'd try to leverage the deadline, he said, more statement than question. Yes, she replied quietly. They always do. A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. You remind me of Savannah, he said softly. Harlow's breath caught. She used to do that too. See through the masks, anticipate the games, always 5 steps ahead, even when she pretended not to be. He leaned back in his chair and studied her, the warmth in his eyes layered with something older, grief maybe, or gratitude. I've spent years building walls, he said, to keep out people like Vance, reporters, opportunists, even the well-meaning ones. He stood now, walking to the window, hands in his pockets. But you, his voice was lower, you walked right past them, not with force, not with charm, but with fire. She said nothing, too stunned to speak. He turned back to her. You don't just work here anymore, Harlow. You belong here. The words settled around her like an embrace. And if you want it, he added, your probation ends today. I'm offering you full-time contract, title, benefits, salary, everything. You've earned it. Her eyes welled, and this time she didn't hide it. Thank you, she whispered. But before you accept, he said, walking slowly back toward her, I need you to know something. She blinked. What? I care about this company, he said. I care about the people in it. But lately, I find myself caring about you more. She froze. He was standing close now. Not intrusively, not in a way that breached boundaries, but in a way that changed everything. I don't know what that means yet, he said honestly. And I'm not asking for anything. I know, she said, heart thudding in her chest. But if I ever cross a line, you haven't, she cut in. You won't. They stood there in silence for a long moment. The kind of silence that holds two truths at once: vulnerability and the slow, cautious spark of something deeper. Then Silas offered his hand. Full time? She shook it. Full time. Their fingers lingered a moment longer than necessary. As she left the office, badge clipped to her blouse and new fire in her chest. She didn't just feel like she'd survived something. She felt like she had arrived. And somewhere deep inside, she knew this wasn't the end of the storm. It was the beginning of something far more powerful. Spring arrived in Omaha like a quiet promise, unfolding slowly through the glass walls of the Callaway Ventures Tower. The trees lining the streets below bloomed in tentative green, and warm light finally replaced the gray wash of winter. Inside the building, everything looked the same: clean lines, dark marble, polished steel. But for Harlow Duckett, nothing was the same anymore. It had been 2 months since the Tokyo debrief, 2 months since she was offered full-time employment, 2 months since Silas Calloway, the untouchable, steel-armored billionaire, had looked her in the eyes and told her she mattered. Since then, the rhythm of her life had shifted into something remarkable. Her mornings began before the sun, her days filled with responsibilities she would have never imagined just weeks prior: scheduling international deals, interfacing with department heads, managing vendor contracts, even accompanying Silas on brief. Trips to Chicago and San Francisco. She had her own key card, her own desk, her own direct line. But more than that, she had respect. Earned, not given. She still lived with Uncle Crawford, whose health was improving steadily. The medication he once rationed now came on time, fully covered by the new company insurance Harlow qualified for. He'd installed wind chimes outside their porch and sat beneath them most afternoons, smiling proudly whenever Harlow returned home in her pressed blazer and tired eyes. "You walk like you belong to the world now," he once said. And you do. But amidst her growing confidence, something else had bloomed. Quietly, dangerously, undeniably, between her and Silas. It wasn't a declaration. There were no confessions, no grand gestures. It was in the way their conversations lingered longer after meetings, the way his hand would pause near hers when they reviewed notes, the way his voice softened whenever he said her name. Like it was a word he had once feared to speak. One Friday evening, long after the staff had left, Harlow was working late in the glass-walled strategy room, reviewing Q2 reports. The sky outside was stained peach and lavender, the city glowing below like scattered stars. She didn't hear him enter. "You should have gone home 2 hours ago," Silas said, his voice cutting gently through the silence. She turned in her chair, caught off guard. "And you shouldn't be stalking employees after dark," she replied, half teasing, half nervous. He chuckled, a rare, genuine sound, and stepped closer, holding 2 cups of coffee. "I figured you were still up here," he said, offering her one. "At the lights don't lie." She accepted it gratefully. "Hazelnut? You always take hazelnut." They sipped in silence for a moment. Then he set his cup down and walked to the far window, hands in his pockets. "I signed the final release for the Miami acquisition today," he said. "It's done." "That's huge," Harlow said. "I thought that wouldn't go through until June." "I pushed it forward," he replied, then quieter. "I'm tired of delaying things that matter." She watched him, sensing a different weight in his words. "Are we still talking about Miami?" she asked softly. He turned to her, eyes darker than usual. "No." There was a pause, thick, charged, full of things that had gone unspoken for too long. "I'm not good at this," he said finally. "Connection. Vulnerability. After Savannah, I shut down for a reason. I didn't trust myself to care again. Not without hurting someone." Harlow stood slowly, setting her coffee aside. "You haven't hurt me." "Not yet. You won't." Silas stepped closer. "You came into my life wearing your uncle's jacket and fear in your eyes," he said, voice low. "And somehow, in all this chaos, you've become the one thing that makes me want to feel again." Her breath caught. "I don't want to ruin what we've built," he said, "but I can't ignore it anymore." Neither could she. Without hesitation, without another word, she stepped forward and placed her hand gently against his chest, right where his heart beat beneath the fabric. It was fast, unsteady, real. "I'm not afraid of you," she whispered. He leaned down slowly, as if asking a question with every inch. And when their lips finally met, it wasn't dramatic or rushed. It was quiet. Sure, like 2 pieces of a puzzle finally snapping into place. The kiss lingered, not because of passion, but because of truth. They pulled apart slightly, foreheads touching, breath mingling. "I don't want to hide," he said. "Then don't." Silas opened his eyes. "There will be scrutiny. Rumors. Boardroom politics." She nodded. "Let them talk. I've already survived worse." He smiled, hands sliding to her waist, grounding them both. "Come with me," he said suddenly. "Where?" "Anywhere." She laughed, blinking away a tear. I still have expense reports to finish." "Fine," he said, mock defeated. "Tomorrow." The next morning, they left the city behind. No suits, no offices. Just a rented car, a small lake cabin, and a promise unspoken between them that whatever this was, they would protect it. Weeks later, when tabloids finally caught wind of their relationship, the narrative was twisted. She was called everything from a gold digger to a scandal. But by then, Harlow had already found her voice. She stood beside Silas during a charity gala and answered a reporter's question directly. "I didn't fall in love with his money. I fell in love with the man who never gave up on me, even when I was ready to give up on myself." The room had gone silent, but Silas took her hand publicly for the first time, and the only sound that mattered was the applause from those who truly understood. That night, in a room full of power and whispers, Harlow Duckett, once just a girl in borrowed clothes, smiled with the quiet grace of someone who had earned every piece of her future. Not by accident, not by luck, but by surviving, growing, and daring to believe she was worthy of more. In my view, The ending of this story is not just satisfying, it's transformative. Harlow's journey from an invisible, struggling girl to a confident, capable woman at the center of one of the most powerful empires is a testament to resilience, integrity, and emotional intelligence. What makes her story deeply compelling is not the fairy tale romance or the corporate Cinderella arc, but the way she earns every step forward through grit, heart, and unshakable purpose. She doesn't wait to be rescued, she rescues herself. And in a way, she rescues Silas too. Silas's transformation is equally powerful. He's not the typical billionaire stereotype. He's wounded, guarded, and emotionally complex. The fact that he lets someone in again, especially someone so unexpected, speaks to the vulnerability and courage required to heal. Their connection is built not on power imbalance, but on mutual recognition of pain, strength, and hope. The ending isn't about Harlow becoming someone new, it's about the world finally seeing who she was all along. And that, to me, is the most powerful kind of ending. One that doesn't just change the characters' lives, but invites the reader to believe that quiet strength, love, and authenticity can rewrite any story, even one that started in fear.